Language 1, Wachkakachakakak. Language 2, Yakanderkats. Famine. It is the year 3982 and all continents have been swallowed by the ocean due to a cataclysmic event. The only piece of land remaining is Costa Rica, some small deserted islands and a small part of Greece. Cr. The Costa Rican soil is in constant dispute between two groups of people. These two tribes have different beliefs and different languages which at the same time forms a part of their belief system. These languages were said to be written around the 21st century and the books containing these languages were the last books remaining after the cataclysm. So the people who survived this event fell into a dark age. The country was separated for a time by a big stream that ran through the land, dividing the country for at least 300 years. After these 300 years the water barrier between the both parts of the country got smaller, until it was crossable. For these 300 years each part of the country had one of the surviving books and there were intellectuals who could manage to communicate to the other part of the country via messages in bottles. These intellectuals were the only ones who knew and understood the two languages and they were the translators of each tribe, and the tribes had prophets that told the word of the dictionary that they so hardly believed in. The other tribe also used their dictionary as core for their belief. Both of the factions had one thing in common, both of them worshipped language, but as the years went by they lost wisdom and turned it in for blind fanatism. The intellectuals had to be very careful in these days, for if one of them were to be seen they would burn at the stake. Both of the tribes also lived on the shore, because the monkeys of the mainland drove them out and they weren't allowed into the jungle. Whoever ventured into the jungle of the primates was never heard of again. Now after the 300 years of isolation passed, the two tribes finally met, and one of them tried talking in their language to one of the other tribe, but as soon as they saw that neither of them can speak their languages they waged war, and so the time of war began. The knowledge of two languages was still outlawed by both of the tribes. The remaining intellectuals tried with all their effort to unite the two tribes, but those efforts were met with vengeance by their corresponding tribes. And so the numbers of the translators dwindled, until there was only one translator left. He saw his fellow linguists burn at the stake. This man in his grief and hopelessness went into the jungle. He never came back. These intellectuals were also commonly known as grammar masters and were also called that in various occasions. The first tribe, this one came from the Caribbean side of the country named the Wachkakachakak tribe, used biological weapons like bullet ants and bags filled with locusts and piss to destroy their enemies' crops. They also possessed some meal weaponry like hoes and bamboo sticks. This tribe had between 1,400 to 1,800 members at the time of the unification of the country, and some of their range weaponry were mango seeds, bow and arrow, old Costa Rican coins and round stones. The second tribe, this one is from the Pacific side named Hak, also used biological weaponry. They learned how to control mosquitoes with malaria and put frog poison into their bats. Their meal weaponry would include bats, hoes and palm leaf whips. Their tribe had 1,900 to 2,100 at the time of the unification of the country. Some of their range weaponry were coconuts, bow and arrow and glass bottles. In the year 4311 they made a truce between the two tribes, after a 117-year-old war. The origin of this truce was due to the monkeys coming down from the mountains and jungles into the coasts and conquering the coastlands the people of both tribes inhabited. These primates had grown fierce and in big numbers. After a long battle that lasted roughly 73 hours, the first tribe was overrun by the monkeys. They had lost and they had retreated to the north. The south part of their territory was taken by the chimps. This battle was called the Battle for Limon. The monkeys' next strike would be to the second tribe, and this strike would go swiftly since they took the cover of darkness in this fight and the tribe was attacked without warning. This tribe also had to retreat towards the north. These two tribes met somewhere at the most northern tip of the county. The primates had cornered them, but with combined efforts the forces rallied at the Battle of Colon. In March 8 of 4513 they had victory. The monkeys were driven back and the tribes even gained some jungle territory from the war. The two tribes now had enough territory to live apart from each other and live in peace. First, the first tribe made a big settlement on their new territory, and this was called New York. Their new capital would be called Wakak. They also gained a big fascination of the mango plant, which made them very wealthy in this particular fruit. They also established some lesser settlements like South Nicaragua, which was a small outpost town that served as a trading port, and Nana, which was also a small town on the outer borders of the jungle. The second tribe also had its renaissance with new settlements like South Colon and its new established capital North Colon. Another known town of theirs was Middle Colon, but this town was further south of the country. They also thrived and made cockroach farms as a new food source, and they came to respect this animal to a very high level. And so harmony ruled this land once again. Talamaka apes. These controlled the most part of the country and lived in the deep jungle and mountains. They were very secretive, but what was known about their establishments was that they were caves and high grounds. They were rivals to both of the human tribes and wanted to kill all of them. These primates were organized in war, and liked to wage war against their enemies. They did not need weapons since their strength was 4 times of that of a human. Greek soil, famine. When the waves came here, only one man survived the catastrophe. This man was known as Famino, but his true identity was kept hidden for few selected individuals only he had trusted. But now he lives in a 300 cubic meters surface, and his only company are the mysterious and omniscient cats. These beings of shadow and light were passed into legend, but he always knew they existed. Now he was stranded on a deserted island, and he thought he was the only human left alive on Earth. He constructed a hut from scratch and lived in there for a time. He planted olive tree and he lived off of the tree for a while. He also harvested water from the rain since he was surrounded by seawater. Famino had a lot of pictures or feet, and he once built a raft out of them. He tried to get out of the island, but it didn't work. In the year 4402 a big storm came to Famino. He had to go into his hut. The storm lasted a long time. Famine fought hard to stay alive, but the storm claimed everything. He still pissed. When the storm was over, the olive tree got rooted out and it was swimming away from the patch of land that Famino had lived in for the past 20 years. The island's radius was reduced to 50 cubic meters and Famine's crops were all destroyed. All of his pans and water collectors had been swept away by the storm. Every night when the high tide comes, Famine has to go on to the roof of his hut to not drown. Famished and driven beyond loneliness, his only company were the undercats that haven't left his side. He tried to eat one in his desperation, but they have teleportation powers and they teleported to Costa Rica as soon as he became a threat to them. Famine was forced to drink ocean water. He wanted to die, but an almighty force would not let him die, and so he lived in that patch of land. Cr. Year 4540 a man named Sam from the first tribe had found a strange tree that had been swept ashore, and he examined it. The tree seemed dead, but out of it grew a sapling. This man took the sapling with him and placed it in the capital without permission of the leader, but took it with him again, reconsidering placing it in the capital. The leader at that time was called Miokal. He was soft and arrogant. He would not have allowed a strange tree to be planted in the courtyard. Besides, it would go against that society's norm. It would have defied the reign of the mango tree which this tribe worshipped. The boy, knowing this, tried disguising it as a mango tree, but there were always inspections from the botany police to see which plants aren't mango and which are. So Sam went to a hidden place to plant the tree again. He tended to it every day. Cr. Year 4562 it had been 22 years since the boy planted the tree in a secret place away from his tribe. The tree had grown and had blossomed. A strange small greenish fruit came out of it. Sam tasted the fruit and he was amazed by the taste. Sam's brother Michael was a botanist police and he followed him to the site where he had the tree. He saw and identified the olive tree. He tackled Sam and took him with him to the city, where he would await judgment for the crime he had committed. Sam saw upon Miokala and he gave out the sentence. Sam were to be fusilated. This made him hate his brother and cursed him for it and his whole tribe too. Sam was tied to pillar and people threw mangoes at him until he died. Michael didn't regret turning his brother in. Him and Sam never saw eye to eye with how they treat the mango in their tribe. Michael went back home and kissed his wife on the lips. His 4 children were also happy to see him. He threw a mango at them for them to fetch it. The next morning Michael was vomiting uncontrollably, and blood was coming from all parts of his body. He died 2 hours after those events. Michael died before he could tell anyone the location of the illegal olive tree. The tribe's physician didn't know what happened to Michael. The next days his family would succumb to this sickness. In the next week 183 people would die of this disease. This disease had likely come from the olive plant that was brought into the country. The virus had likely been dormant for all these years inside Sam's body until something triggered it. This mutation of Ebola was the cause of the tree coming ashore to Costa Rican soil. The tribe's numbers diminished during this plague. They made rafts for the dead and sended them with the mango onto their bodies, so they may give the Wak-Wak god that mango so that they may enter heaven. Greece, year 4182. Famino had lived on this accursed island for 200 years now. The Inger cats wanted to eat him, but they knew he would not die, not until the moon touches the earth and Mecha gets brought back from under the seas. One day Famine looked into the distance from his hut and saw something resembling a ship. As it came closer to his island he saw what appeared to be some wood and a couple bones on it. There also seemed to be a seed on top of this vessel. At last Famine moved from him roof. He took the seed and took a bite at it. Famino, even in his famished state, knew what the smarter thing to do was. He planted the seedling in a safe part and tore his own hut down to provide protection for the seedling. He built a small brick wall around the sprout, so it would not get flooded when the high tide comes. This would come at the cost of Famine not sleeping dry again for a long time. Famino had some hope at last for extinguishing some of his pain. Cr. Year 4637. The second tribe had a time of prosperity and peace, for all these years since the war against the jungle foes. But now their society got so used to comfort that they established activities like lottery and parties. The lottery prizes didn't come in possessions but in work hours of laborers that would get paid by the own lottery commission. They would also be performed by prisoners who broke the law, and so these laborers would be appointed to the tasks they could do and would be demanded by the lottery winners. Some ones came in 200 sunrises and some were 100 sunrises and so on. This system was doing alright for the first few years. After that the fake lottery sellers came along, and they manufactured fake tickets to trick the population into buying them and giving them recourses like food or materials. These fake lottery sellers were taken captive by the leaders of the second tribe. This illegal system was outlawed by the leaders. These were 4 leaders. The power of the tribe was distributed among these 4 people. Sangus was the leader of law, Nigel was the leader of the trade, Lala was the leader of conflicts, and Kermgerm was the leader of worship. These 4 leaders acted as judges to decide what would happen to people who committed crimes like the fake lottery sellers. These were all executed. The real lottery managed by the tribe leaders and hierarchy got compromised. The leaders figured out that they don't have to pay high fees to laborers to perform tasks that would cost a lot of their time and so a lot of resources. They developed a new strategy. Since they had no competence, they started only selling tickets with no winning chance. And to keep the people in line with the system they would pay the laborer forces next to nothing to do a job for a few hours just so the public sees that there is people still winning this lottery. The leaders kept all the profit and the laborers that worked for them were soon out of the job since they couldn't live off of the fake salary they were getting. The ones that wanted to come out with a story were quickly dealt with. One of the fake lottery ticket sellers, his name was Ahab. He had just come out of imprisonment and had talked to a laborer who wasn't a prisoner. He had found out that it was all a lie. This workhand was executed for charges against the religion of the tribe. When Ahab got word of this, he started planning his next move, to overthrow the state. He started conspiring with other fellow ex-convicts. All of them had formed an underground group of rebellion against the tribe. They started pulling people into their revolution one by one. Their plan was to release 1 billion of black ball spiders into the leader's building and rebel against the opposing side. They went trough with it. The riots got big. A lot of buildings were burned down. The cockroach statue got torn down from the middle of the city and dragged out into the ocean. They binded Kermgerm to it and the statue sunk to the depth of the Pacific Ocean along with the leader of worship. Sangus tried to flee from the riots, but his guards were killed by strangulation, and he was hung from the gallows he used to send people to. The leader of conflict tried to kill his attackers, but he was overwhelmed too. His stomach was opened and filled with stones while him being alive. Nigel wasn't found in the leader's house. Some say he fled to the jungle and some say he went running to the first tribe. At last, after 6 months of civil unrest, the second tribe put in place a better system to replace the other one. This system would have many villages and the already existing big towns would have 2 representatives, the newly created villages having 1, and having them put up the laws and vote upon choosing the people to execute those laws, and having the businesses be left to the tribe's individuals or families. Greece, year 4620. Famino found a bowl that was swept ashore. He can now collect water from the rain. His tree grew to the extent where he can climb it to escape the high tides and can sleep dry. It still hadn't bared any fruit. But some luck at last for Famino. Cr. Year 4672. The second tribe sends a scouting party deeper into the jungle and they find a shrine in the heart of the jungle. This states that all monkeys have 2 names and that those names are either Kermit or Famine, and that the Famine apes are the alpha and Kermit apes are the beta. It also stated that Thessi apes had their own tongue and could communicate to one and other. The tribe had just discovered a Chumpyrki and wanted to learn more, but they got ambushed by the creatures, and only one of them came back from the expedition. They still have to find out who is their leader and how they are so organized to pull off attacks like that. Greece, year 4646. Famino's mango tree had bared the first fruits. After 64 long years, he could reap his harvest. He would not longer be bound to hunger, but could have a tasteful mango. By this time the water level had sunk a little and Famine's island was now 150 cubic meters. Materials from the old world were also swept to his shore, like ring fragments from airplanes that were used in an age long past, or plastic pieces that were once whole. He would find ways to use this junk to his benefit. He made tools from the metal fragments, and used the plastic as a roof for a new shelter. His island would experience a change and grass grew once more, and the undercats returned to the island once again. In his heart Famine began to wonder if he was truly alone and he questioned this. Cr. Year 4701. The first tribe had lost its leader. He was assassinated by an infiltrate ape. The skirmishes between them and the Talamanca apes were long and brutal ones after this assassination. His youngest son took up the command and called an attack towards these territories. The biggest battle they went into were the Pindo Wars. This battle claimed the lives of 3,000 soldiers of this tribe. They were utterly defeated and needed to come up with another plan. Their defeat was due to them running into the enemy lands and having the disadvantage of low ground, but also due to a special strategy the primates had made. This strategy was about having built mass killing traps that took out large portions of their force. The first tribe also developed a strategy for this war, but this was very ineffective due to the circumstances of the ground of battle. They finally came to the decision that they couldn't beat them in open battle, so they built walls around their borders, and defend them with well-armed soldiers. Cr. Year 4705. The second tribe got word of the ongoing war between the first tribe and the Talamanca apes. They got word of this due to spies infiltrating that society. They had grown afraid that the monkeys' attention would also turn to them since the first tribe had made fortifications along their borders and their lands not being too accessible. The representatives of the villages and towns sat in the hall and discussed this pending menace. They decided to send in a messenger to the monkeys to talk to them. And so they did. They sent a 11-year-old boy because they thought he was renewable. He ventured into the jungle. A few hours had passed and there was no word from the jungle until all of a sudden a pharaoh monkey jumped to the warriors guarding the borders. They finally killed the ape with their arrows. The monkey had an ear in his mouth. It was presumably from the infant they sent in to negotiate. It was clear to the people that the monkeys didn't want to negotiate with them. Attacks of monkeys grew more common, and more soldiers were called onto the borders. It was clear the monkeys were planning something, but it wasn't clear what it was. To be continued.